Welcome to the second half of our candidate forum. You will notice that Jeff has moved from the podium down to one of the tables. The reason is that Delegate Valkenberg's opponent wanted to participate. We invited him, and I heard from him a couple of days ago. He said he was not going to participate. So we decided we were going to go ahead. It will obviously be only about half as long. I suspect Jeff may make it a little more casual and make it a little more conversational than it is here. But again, I'll let him introduce Delegate Valkenberg. Thank you all again for being here. Welcome to the 72nd so-called candidate forum. Thanks. Thank you. Good evening. Again, incumbent ChamberRVA Valkenberg. He's making his third run for the House of Delegates. His opponent this year is Republican Chris Holmes, who declined to participate in tonight's debate. Stan Valkenberg, elected to his first term in 2017, is a high school government teacher in the Rico public school system. He has been an educator for nearly 20 years. A native of upstate New York, where he was publicly educated, he moved to Virginia to enroll at the University of Virginia, which is an alumnus. He has a degree as well from Virginia Commonwealth University. A single parent, Mr. Van Valkenberg, lives in Rico with his 3 children. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Jeff. And let me start by just thanking ChamberRVA for doing this again. This is my third run for the House of Delegates, and they've had this event every year that I've ran and every year I've been here because I think it's incredibly important that you show up for your constituents and you answer questions. Also, I want to thank J. Sergeant Reynolds for hosting this. So I think one of the exciting things that you might have heard from the previous debate that we've done in this legislature is to really reinforce the community college system with the G3 program, to match people to programs that will get them skilled in a skilled job where we have demand in Virginia and get them a good paying job. So I think it's really great that we're doing it here. My name is ChamberRVA Valkenberg. I am a teacher at the Rico County Schools. I've taught government for 17 years, and I have just finished my second term in the Virginia House of Delegates. And I never thought I'd be here. I never thought I would be in the House of Delegates, but really what got me to run in 2017 was a sense that in Virginia we had stopped investing in people. We were underfunding our schools. We were refusing to invest in healthcare or provide people with the access that we could provide them. And we were also the state that was shunting people to the side. Prior to the 2020 session, if you could be fired as a teacher or denied housing based on who you loved. And so I got in the race in 2017 because we needed to be a Commonwealth that was investing in all people. Because when you invest in people, that's how you become the number one state for business. So we've been able to accomplish a lot of those goals, expanding Medicaid coverage to 570,000 people, capping insulin prices to bring down prescription drug costs, investing in education, and making it illegal to fire somebody based on who they love. And I'm incredibly excited about what we can do in the years to come. We've got a great chance to revolutionize our education system and other things. But I look forward to tackling all that in this next 30 minutes. I know my 2 minutes are about that, so let's get at it.
Well, we cannot start a conversation with ChamberRVA Valkenberg without jumping into redistricting. We're patron of constitutional amendment under which the commission is redrawing legislative congressional boundaries. Do you believe that the commission will come up with boundaries that the legislature can accept, or are you anticipating that task will fall to the Virginia Supreme Court? Are you confident that a court dominated by justices selected by the former Republican majority can come up with a plan satisfactory to both parties?
Yeah, let me start and say, I think it's redistricting reform in big governance is one of the core parts of who I am politically. And it's one of the reasons I got into this. And I carried the constitutional amendment in the House on redistricting reform, an amendment and a bill that became very controversial in my party because I think it's the right thing to do. I think states work better and more reflect their people when you have competitive districts. And so we were able to get that over the line in the legislature, and the citizenry overwhelmingly voted for it, 70%, I believe. And I remain optimistic. Redistricting is a dirty business. It's controversial, it's messy, and it's always been that way. Now it's just done in public. And I think that there's 2 things that give me hope about the commission, and there are 2 things that are baked into the amendment. First is the citizen members. The citizen members throughout the process have really come to take leadership and really push back on politicians. And I think if we have become a source of good decision making. The second thing I'll say is the transparency measures. The transparency has forced changes in how they make decisions. It's made them make better decisions. And so I think you take those two things, and I remain optimistic that the commission can get something done that we can all accept. But I think no matter how it ends up happening, we're going to have districts that better represent Virginia, which means more competitive elections, which means better policy for the Commonwealth.
A question I'd love to ask the previous panelists on gun rights and gun control. The legislature has left unfinished possible ban on military style rifle, assault rifles. What is your position on such a prohibition, and would you do away with the current system for authorizing concealed weapons permits, whatever issued by local clerks to Virginians who apply and demonstrate that they do not have a criminal record? Would you favor restoring that practice under which, would you restore that practice to the circuit court judges who have the discretion to issue those permits?
Yeah, thank you for the questions. I'll state at the top that, I'm from rural upstate New York. Parents live on a 2-mile long dirt road, so I should certainly understand the need for weapons for protection, or it's a hunt, the desire to have them for those reasons. But I think, what we've been talking about in the legislature in the last couple of years isn't your right to own a weapon. It's about having common sense restrictions in place to help with gun violence, things like universal background checks, 1 new gun a month, red flag laws that take guns temporarily for people who are most at danger of harming themselves or others. All things that we know can bring down gun violence prevention. And I'll say that that's one of the things that separates my opponent and I. One of the things that separates us the most. He's against universal background checks as an example. But as to your particular question, like voted for assault in the legislature in the past, I think there's a way to do it and protect people's rights. We don't, the Second Amendment wasn't created for people to have semi-automatic machine guns that we've seen used in things like school shootings and shootings. As to the second part of that question, I'll admit to not feeling very strongly one way or the other about it. And I think that's not necessarily, I think, what needs to be the priority moving forward. I'm sure somebody will put legislation in and we'll go from there. But I think what's more important is that we are doing the things that we know can bring down violence. Because, just this year we've seen a girl in Rickenbacker County shot just outside of her school.
A question I also asked, I'd like to ask the previous panelists on job training, early childhood education, in particular with the chamber. What fields do you anticipate will be in demand now and beyond the pandemic? And what steps do you think should be taken to steer Virginians towards those jobs and prepare them for them? This is obviously something in which the community colleges such as play a role. Should Virginia consider a European model where under which people are steered in their high school years to a vocation track or a professional track?
Yeah, let me just note 2 things that we've already done that I think are incredibly important to make for success, and then move to one thing I'd like to see us do. So the 2 things we've already done, one I mentioned is the G3 program, which really seeks to match kids in community colleges with jobs that are in demand and high skilled: nursing, tech, early education, and I'm probably forgetting a few. And that program really has the chance to do amazing things. It's only been able to be implemented for the last year. Really, from here on out, it's about educating people about the opportunities. The second thing
There is a public service component.
yes, there is. Yes. The second thing we've done is project labor agreements, which allow unions to get apprentice workers on public projects, which I think is incredibly important. We want to have local labor being used. We want to bring people up into those skilled trades. And then the thing moving forward that I think we really need to do is I think we need to do a big relook at our education curriculum. Since ESSA passed, which was the predecessor to No Child Left Behind, states have had more autonomy in how to get accreditation for schools, and that's been able to allow them to kind of piecemeal bring in these types of programs. But I'd like to see a kind of Maryland-style Kerwin Commission where we're doing a methodical rethinking of a lot of our educational components. How can we make the teaching profession more robust with career ladders? How can we do less testing but more impactful testing that's testing skills rather than testing rote memorization? How can we have a curriculum that is responsive, right, to higher education but also to the workforce? And so I think moving forward, that's one of the things that really excites me about the next couple of years is the possibilities for some big changes in education that can really make this a countrywide leader.
You made a reference to opportunities for unions. What about the preservation of Virginia's prohibition on compulsory union membership? Is that something that you support? And if as an alternative, were it preserved by the legislature and the governor, would you support fair share legislation that would allow the unions to collect from non-union members covered by labor negotiated contracts, some fee to support those efforts?
Yeah, I think it's important to note that we can be a state that's good for business and for workers. I mean, we've been the #1 state for business. 2 out of the 4 years I've been in the legislature. 1 year because COVID canceled it. The first year I was in the legislature, we were 50th for workers, and we were just recently ranked 23rd. Big improvement, and that's because of things like raising the minimum wage, project labor agreements, healthcare policies that we've passed. And so, we can do both. And I think the thing that allows you to do both is you focus on kind of core things that both parties need, right? The first thing CNBC noted about why we were first for business was our educated workforce. So we need to double down on that. We talked about our infrastructure. You can see that in the last couple of years, we've invested highly in infrastructure. We've got to modernize it, got to have the roads, the rail, the bike trails, the things that we need in a modern economy. And it's about regulatory reform. The first year I was in the legislature, there was a bipartisan agreement I voted for to do regulatory reform because your regulatory funding goes to being #1 for business. So I think, I think there's a way we can get to working on right to work, that we can do it in a responsible way where we can be first for business and we can be first for workers. It's not a huge priority moving forward. The fair share component, sure. But I think it's really focusing on the 3 things I mentioned that's going to allow us to do both: education, infrastructure.
So you would favor the repeal of the prohibition on compulsory union membership as a condition for a job?
Over time, I don't know that it's the right thing to do tomorrow, but it's moving forward and trying to do both, yes.
And were it preserved, you would support a fair share. And then, as we discussed earlier, Virginia is incrementally raising its minimum wage, pushing towards $15 an hour. Would you favor or oppose making an immediate jump to $15 an hour?
Yeah, I support where we are now. The law that passed 2 years ago, which incrementally raises it up to $12, I believe, in the next 2 years, and then there's a pause for a study to look at the kind of regional variation. I do think it's important to note that living conditions in Northern Virginia are much different than they are in Southwestern Virginia, which is much different than they are here in Richmond. And I think, our minimum wage was so low, and we were taking dignity away from workers. You had people who could work a full-time job and couldn't put food on the table, or couldn't pay their healthcare bills, couldn't get their kids supplies for schools, and that's not right. I mean, we should be encouraging work. And so, we started at such a low level. It's important to get up as we get closer to 15%. I do think it's important to look at what the economics tells us. So I would support the status quo.
And then on mandatory vaccinations for COVID-19, as well as mandatory masking requirements, your position on that. Of course, I guess yours is a privileged view as an educator.
Yeah, I mean, look, the one thing we know is that vaccines are what's going to get us out of this. Vaccines are what's going to allow our economy to stay open and thrive, keep people going to businesses. It's what's going to keep kids in our classrooms, make sure kids can learn 5 days a week. And so it's incredibly incumbent on us to get the vaccination rates up. And so I think, you start with the carrot, you start with incentives, you start by trying to get everybody you can vaccinated. And then when we get to that point where it starts to plateau, I think mandates become more and more necessary, whether it's in private business, we've seen United Airlines do it very successfully, or if it's in some of the kind of higher risk governmental spheres. We saw New York City Public Schools, but 99% vaccination rate. And so we do need to talk about folks who are involved in elder care, folks who are at hospitals, folks who are at schools, getting vaccinations, because it's been great to be back to school. We had 18 months where we were virtual, and these last couple of weeks where we've had most kids in their seat 5 days a week. The kids that are vaccinated not having quarantine for as long. It's a beautiful thing. Kids are learning, people are back at work, businesses are able to thrive, and so yeah, we should do everything we can to make sure that that remains the case, and that includes vaccine mandates.
And we're in the middle of the voting season. Would you support a system of voting by mail, or those ballots would be sent to eligible Virginians? They can be completed and then returned by them?
Yeah, so let's just first say that increased access doesn't mean decreased security, right? Increased access can go with increased security. I think one of the things that you've seen over the last 2 years is a Democratic legislature that's really emphasized both really tightening up our laws and making sure that the election process works, but also increasing access. I mean, we were the second hardest state to vote in 2 years ago. We are now the 12th easiest state to vote in. And you notice that we did not have any of the legal problems in 2020 that you saw in other states. And that's because of legislation that folks like Charnel Herring and myself and C.M. Price passed. You know, whether or not we go to all mail voting, I think it's a conversation we need to have as a Commonwealth. If you look at the system we have now, which is kind of a hybrid, where you have 45 days of early voting mixed with the kind of more available absentee voting, you get a very robust turnout. And I think it's a great system. And I think it's a system that we've increased access really well and really efficiently. If we wanted to go all vote by mail, I mean, I certainly think that what you see in California, Utah, blue and red states, as you see higher voter participation, I think it's something we're looking at. But I also think it's worth pausing and saying, do we like the system we have now, or do we think moving forward we want to move to vote by mail? And I think there's merits to both sides. And so I'm not trying to duck the question. I just think what we've done is so new. Let's sit with what we've got and kind of reassess a couple years down the road. You know, I'll end with, sorry to go long, I'll end with one of the bills that I carried 2 years ago was to create a permanent absentee vote by mail list, so you can become a permanent absentee voter. And what we've seen in states that do vote by mail is that they get there slowly, because what happens over time is so many people enjoy voting by mail, the list gets bigger and bigger. So I think that'll be a really good sign of whether or not Virginians want to do something like that. I think we should wait for that to work.
And then on the issue of abortion rights and abortion restrictions, you expressed your support for abortion rights. Would you go so far as the Democratic governor has proposed to memorialize those rights in the Virginia Constitution?
Yeah, look at a woman's healthcare decision should be between her and her doctor, and that's it, full stop. And what we're seeing at the national level is an assault on that constitutional right. And the only way we're going to protect those rights, it looks like, in the short and possibly long term, is at the state level. And once again, this is a huge divide between my opponent and myself, who is, say, an extremist on the other side, who voted for a Texas-style law. I think we need to protect that right. Do you think that as a state, it would be a responsible step to look at enshrining that protection so that it's there and set the state to really know that it will be there? I think that's important. And I'll end by saying that this is increasingly also, when you look at why we're the number one state for business, another thing that they notice in CNBC is we're a welcoming state where we're protecting all people's rights, and that businesses don't want to go to states where they're attacking women, or they're trying to attacking transgender students, or they're, you know, suppressing the vote. And so I think this is one of those issues that is, first off, the right thing to do to protect that right, but it's also the right economic thing to do too.
And in this post-George Floyd setting, it's elevated awareness of racial equity, and of course, region being a government center. What steps can the state government take to promote minority employment, particularly in positions historically closed to people of color?
Yeah, well, I think the first step comes from awareness. The first step comes from the awareness of the problem that exists and kind of assessing what you're doing. And so I think one big step, and this is kind of to the side of your question, but I think it is a good example, is when you look at the Henrico County judicial bar prior to 2 years ago, it was all old white men. All of our judges, they were all lovely people. I love all of them. They're great guys. But we needed to diversify the bench because one way that you start promoting more equality and equity in jobs and business and government is by reflecting the Commonwealth for what it is. And Henrico County is an incredibly diverse community. I mean, we have over 100 languages in our schools. And so our government, our courts, and our nonprofit institutions, and our boards and our commissions should all reflect that diversity. And I think, when you look at the governor, I think he's done a good job of doing that. When you look at speakers, boards, commissions, she's done a good job of that. With judges, we've done a good example of that. So I think it starts with that. And then I can pivot kind of to other issues.
The legislature, of course, is divided over the rollback of qualified immunity, legal protections for police alleged to use excessive force. Do you favor the preservation of those protections, and what steps can be taken to ensure accountability by officers who resort to excessive force on duty?
Yeah. So first, I would say, what we want is we want to make sure police are funded and resourced. We want to make sure they have the tools they need. And we also want to make sure that all communities have good policing, right? Better policing. And so, when we talk about the fact that the legislature in the last couple of years has instituted pay raises for state police, something that was long overdue, or invested in community policing. Those are important steps, but we also want to make sure that bad apples are coming. So you've seen the last couple of years some attempts to do that. For instance, having a decertification process so that bad apples can be rooted out at the local level, something we didn't have, which was an outlier in states. You see it allowing localities to do citizen review boards so that police have due process, citizens have some transparency and have some oversight. On qualified immunity, I think it's really important to note that qualified immunity is talking about your constitutional rights. This comes into effect when someone's constitutional rights have been taken, which means that if you're even in the process of talking about qualified immunity, someone's rights have been taken, which means the cop has acted in an unconstitutional way. So we should reform qualified immunity because people who are, taking away members of our community's rights, that shouldn't be protected. That's what the Constitution is for. The Constitution is there to protect us from government infringing on those rights. And so, to the extent that qualified immunity does that, it should be reformed to not do that. And that's why I voted for it in the previous session, and we'll have efforts at amending and reforming it
Show this is a matter that the legislature has yet to resolve. Back to campaigns and elections, of course, that is a sky's the limit practice on campaign contributions. Would you favor a system of restrictions on giving by individuals and corporations? And if you favor limits, what might those limits be?
Yeah, I mean, this goes back to the reason I did redistricting reform. I'm so passionate about it. I think we need a government that works for people. And I think when your campaign finance system is broken, it doesn't do that. I think that's true at the national level. And I think that's certainly true at the state level as well. And that's why about a month ago, myself and 3 other delegates put out a series of proposals to get the ball rolling on campaign finance reform. That included more disclosure on dark money that comes into the state. We've got great disclosure on candidates funding of campaigns, but not on dark money. That's the ban money of private use of campaign funds, which I cannot believe is actually legal here, but it is. And the third thing was to put a limitation cap on how much people could give. I do think the federal level is too low. I think it encourages people to give money to dark money groups. And so what the number is, I'll be honest with you, I'm not 100% sure. But the first step is to even a conversation in the General Assembly. As you know, the Senate struck down, refused to vote for banning personal use, literally the lowest hanging fruit of campaign finance reform. And so it's going to be a long road to get campaign finance reform, and we're probably going to have to accept compromise if we get a cap on individual and group giving. And it's worth doing because it's not even about corruption, it's about the appearance of corruption. People think the process doesn't work, they think that politicians aren't for them. That's going to make them more cynical about the process, and it's going to make our weaken our democracy. And it's I think one of the pillars of what we do is making sure people have access to us, making sure that they feel like they have a voice, and that includes voting access, that includes redistricting reform, and it includes climate reform for sure.
And sort of the lightning round, Joe Biden, your pick for the 24 Democratic presidential nomination.
There's 3 elections before then here in Virginia for sure.
Okay, and then we're at a pay raise for legislators. It's been some time.
No, I don't think so. I think if we're going to be talking about an issue like that, we need to be talking about amending the Constitution, having a broader rethink of the Constitution. When we start talking about issues like legislator pay, or you start talking about things like term limits, or you start thinking about things like how long the session should be, all topics that regularly get discussed in shadowing classes. I think the only way to do that is to do it through a constitutional mechanism, like we did, last time we did it in 1970. And so I would not support that. If we want to kick the Constitution around and see where we need to have a broader rethink, sure.
Well, what about, when you asked this question in the previous panel, what about some type of inflation trigger that would adjust legislative salaries upward as the economy went through its gyrations?
No.
And then on the elimination of grocery tax, both candidates, the governor have talked about, it could be a very substantial hit to the general fund, $1 million a year, and support immediate elimination, or should that be addressed as part of a larger effort in modernizing Virginia's tax system?
Yeah, I think it's important to note that if we were to get rid of it right away with no other policies to balance it out, localities would face a huge budget shortfall. And when we look back to 4 years ago when Gillespie was running on the income tax cut, it's even Senate Republicans in the legislature said, no, we're not doing that, because it would require huge cuts to services, which are already pretty threadbare in the state as compared to others. Now, as far as a broader rethink, sure, if we could get rid of the grocery tax and make the tax code a little bit fairer, a little bit, we have a very regressive tax code. If we could make it a little bit more progressive and having people at the top of the end paying a little bit more, so that everyday folks pay a little less on their grocery bill, I'm totally for that. But we have to do it in a responsible way. I heard a kind of flippant response that we could just pull in the budget surplus, which it's taken 3 or 4 years to build our reserves up to a level where they're finally at a record. When I first entered the legislature, the reserves were so low that we were going to lose our AAA bond rating, and we had to make drastic changes in the budget to make sure that didn't happen. And so it's incredibly important that when we're budgeting with a reserve in mind so that we can put money in there. It's incredibly important about how we budget out in the long term for long-term things that we have to pay for, like wastewater and education. And so if we're going to do something like get rid of the grocery tax, let's do it, but let's make sure we're doing it in a way that we're not going to spite our face, and that we're making sure we can pay for things. We're making sure we're keeping budget reserves up, and we're not willing down nothing for there's an actual emergency. And then if we do it, we make the tax bill a little bit fairer for everyday folks.
And one last question, touching on recreational use, legal recreational use of marijuana. Should there be greater latitude in the law to allow these dispensaries in areas not adversely, disproportionately hit by arrests and prosecution, such as more affluent sections of the area? And of course, as a follow-up, your own history of marijuana use, if
A very boring past, but more boring than most people in this room. But
is that a yes?
once or twice. So, I think it's an incredibly complicated subject. It's something that my subcommittee dealt with for a number of weeks in this last session, and I'm very conflicted about personally, which I think is because I've been a teacher for so long. I have seen how it negatively impacts students. I'm not a yes for marijuana legalization unless it's public health focused. And I think the bill that we passed out at the end of the day was public health focused, and largely because of the amendments that I wouldn't vote for the bill if they were in there, so I'll leave a handful. One is we made sure that all regulations that deal with public health have to be approved by a public health board made up of doctors and scientists, rather than being made by the main board that's, focused business and government officials, so that it be deemed to promote public health. We capped the number of dispensaries at 400. In Colorado, where they have a more free market approach, you have 2 dispensaries for Starbucks and McDonald's combined. And on Staples Mill Road, the corridor I live on, that would be 8 dispensaries from Broad Street to 295. And that doesn't even include the ones that be off Staples Mill. And so I think that's a touch excessive, and it's not focusing on public health, so we put the cap on. We put tighter restrictions on testing so that bad actors would be kicked out of the trade if they continue to have testing that showed that the product had too much chemicals in it or too potent or anything else. And so I think it's incredibly important that it's public health focused. I think that it needs to be regulated in the way that the ABC is. Maybe not exactly like the ABC. We did create this as a separate entity. This is a separate thing. But no, I don't think the free market should bring it. I don't think it should go over, because I think it should be public health focused, because it's a drug and it has negative consequences on people's lives, including a lot of students. And we should be doing everything we can to make sure that while maybe we should legalize it, it's appropriate thing to do, we're doing it in a way where we are not damaging society.
And the floor is yours for close.
Thank you everybody for being here and watching online. I would humbly request your vote in this upcoming election. I think it's been an incredible couple of years as a legislature. 17 years teaching in the county. Never thought I'd get into this, but we've been able to fully fund schools for one of the first times in a decade. We've been able to get more counselors in schools. We've been able to get more support staff in schools. We've been able to get teachers pay raise after 7 years. We've made a ton of progress on healthcare access, affordability, expanding Medicaid, which has made sure that 570,000 people have access to healthcare, including 125 since COVID, who otherwise wouldn't have had healthcare in the pandemic. We have worked to lower prescription drug costs by capping insulin. We have worked to lower deductibles through things like the reinsurance program. And then we've invested in infrastructure, and we've invested in people, whether it's pre-K or community colleges, or making sure we have the Central Virginia Transportation Authority. So Central Virginia can be a cutting edge economic hub, just like Hampton Roads and just like Northern Virginia. And we've also made it a commonwealth for all people. Right? We've been a welcoming place. As the governor says, we've kept the doors open and the lights on. I think that's incredibly important as we go into this next election. It was only 2 years ago that you could be fired as a teacher because of what you loved. And that was happening in Chesterfield when we passed the law just 2 years ago, banning that behavior. So it was happening. And we want to get this problem because this all builds on itself. When we invest in people and we treat all people with dignity and respect, we become a place that people want to do business in. You become a place that people want to work in. And you become a thriving community like we see here in Enrico. So thank you for watching. I'd love you to go for me. I'd love to go back for another term and keep up our work.
Thank you, Delegate from Baltimore. We really appreciate it. Jeff, thank you for the wonderful job you did moderating tonight. Thank you all for attending. One more night of candidate forums on October 13th. We will be doing basically districts that are Chesterfield based, the 27th, the 66th, and 68th district. So that Kirk Cox is the current incumbent in that one district, isn't running again. And then Don Adams district and Roxanne Robinson's district. That'll be the 13th at 7 o'clock at the chamber. We're going to have the same kind of limited audience. So if you are interested in participating, please get in touch with me at the chamber, John Easter at ChamberRVA.com. I'll try to make sure you can get a seat. So thank you all and thank you again.